an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, C, Book 1 of Sea and Shadow. Chapters 8, 9, and 10, and also like that tail end of 7 that I thought was actually the ending of 7 last time, but wasn't, so I didn't read it. My bad. In these chapters, we get to see a little bit more of Calder's history, and Bliss is scary. Bliss is real scary. I don't know what to make of that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George, if you're out there, what's up? So, yeah, the end of Chapter 7 that I missed last time, thankfully, isn't so intensely, relevant to the plot, at least as far as I know right now. So I don't feel like it's going to take too much time to cover it, and it wasn't something absolutely crucial that it was like, I can't believe you didn't read that yet. But it is really upsetting. So at the end of the last episode, some of you may have heard me go, oh my god, it's actually raining worms. This is horrifying. I stand by that 100%. And also, I'm really even more grossed out by the knowledge that these are practically leeches. They suck blood, but they glow. And they basically turn it into a game on board of how many each person kills. They count them in a very Lord of the Rings-esque sort of tally. And the whole energy of this is like, ah, God, this again. Not really like, oh, we're in such danger. Nobody seems genuinely worried. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is just an annoying inconvenience that we don't want to deal with. It's almost like their attitude sort of reminded me of like you park your car under a tree and then you come out and your car is just covered in bird shit. And you're just like, man, this doesn't actually do anything, but I hate it. And I found this to be really fun because Nibirius doesn't know what's going on, which I found sort of interesting. I guess that these clouds aren't super common because Nibirius has been to this island before. So it's not like he hasn't done any traveling, but he never ran into this particular, I want to call it a weather event, but I'm not sure if that's accurate. I love seeing the different ways in which everybody chooses to deal with the problem. So Petal is poisoning each one of them with acid while counting. Andel's kicking them over the side. Urziah is just smashing them with axes. Of course, Calder's using his swords. A musket cracked overhead and one of the worms exploded into goo. It had been distressingly close to Calder's face. Seriously, Duster, get down here and use your boots like a human being. And, they were among the least harmful hazards of the Aeon. Over the years, he'd begun to look forward to the break. Wow, all right. So, yeah, poor Nibirius, too, when he asks, is this an attack? And his voice is all, high-pitched. He doesn't know any better. So, they tell him, too, what they do. Calder says they have a venomous sting that increases your body temperature. The infected, without exception, hurl themselves into the sea within minutes. And Nibirius is like, so, does that help? So Calder lets his awareness go down, Glowing worms swirl in the water, moving in a swarm that matches the cloud above. The ones that fall from the sky are only larvae. These are the true children of Cthenachar, the great worms. Each individual has a row of razor-sharp teeth in its circular mouth, and their hunger presses against the Liathatons, I can never get these names, skin like volcanic heat. Any one of them is thicker than the mast of the ship above, and long enough to wrap the Liathaton completely in its coils. There are hundreds in the water. The Liathaton bears its own teeth, opening its spirit. Let these lesser creatures, these pathetic parasites born in a world of weakness, feel its contempt. I thought this was interesting because of the whole unveiling of the spirit that presses, that like presence that presses on you in Cradle. Let them feel the malice, the hunger, the hatred of centuries. They may be able to shred humans to pieces, but one might as well brag about swatting fleas or crushing blades of grass. The worms are all but mindless, knowing nothing but the need to feed. They still know enough to keep their distance, waiting for prey to fall outside of the Liathaton's reach. So, and Calder says, no, it doesn't help. So yeah, these little babies that are falling from the sky grow to those fucking things. And I have to assume that if you fall into the water, but you're close enough to the hull of the ship that you are protected by the Elder that is strapped to the hull, the Elder will eat you, though. Like, it's not such an ally that it's going to let that pass. It will. That's part of why, I mean, I was going to say that's part of why Shara has to mind herself, but she's an outright enemy. I don't know how much the ship can tell between people that are like crew members and not. I'm going to assume can't, really, you know? But yeah, the whole thing culminates in Nibirius being like, all right, well, if that's all these are, you know, I shouldn't let it get to me because considering what lies ahead, it's going to be way worse. And when they ask again, what does lie ahead? And he says, we're close enough that I believe it's safe to tell you. And the thing is, he doesn't. He tells them where they're going, but he doesn't tell them what they're after. And it takes Calder quite a while to catch on. Like his mother eventually just has to outright tell him because, spoilers, she's on the island. And I love this too. Nibirius says, what we see on the island will make this worm cloud seem pleasant. You will all earn your fees then. But when we get to the island, these bitches are just like, we never said we were going to help you, like, get the thing. We said we would bring you. That was the deal. So thanks for coming and go have fun. Which is a great moment that I was super not expecting. Of course, I assumed that it was like part of the package was services to the ends of you know, achieving this, what's the word I want? Errand feels like too small. It's a recovery mission, right? So that's what I thought we were getting. And of course, so did Nibirius. Surprise! Not in the fine print, after all. This is why it's so important to read that shit, you guys. Guys, I have... Speaking of fine print, those of you who don't have health insurance may be familiar with Care Credit, which is a credit card geared towards... basically, it's geared towards the poor because it's got, like, no credit check. And it's meant to be used for medical debt. But it's got a crazy interest rate, and I paid mine off a couple years ago now and have not touched it since because now I have access to better credits, like rates on other cards. But they sent me an email today that was like, hey, we're having a special promotion with no interest for 6 months. And then in the fine print, it said after promotional period ends, interest will rise to 28.99%, which truly shouldn't even be legal. Like, that's insane to me. And I just read that because there was a moment where I was like, well, 6 months, no interest. Maybe I should if I have a couple purchases coming up, should do it that way. Yeah, no, absolutely fucking not. So fine print, kids. It's important. It's boring, but you will be glad you read it because you will not believe some of the shit that they just slide up in there. And they act like it's like ridiculous that you read it sometimes, especially when you're in person having to sign something. Let them think you're ridiculous. It's better than feeling ridiculous later because you fell for some shit. I'm just saying. So then we go to the start of chapter 8 and we get the more details about the soulbound and how it works. Certain objects share the mysterious powers of elders or chimera. These are usually made from remnants of the creature's body, a sword made from nightworm's claw, for instance, or a pendant made from Leathaton's scales. When such objects are awakened, a mysterious phenomenon can be observed. Under specific conditions, a human being can be bound to these objects during the awakening procedure. Afterward, that person can draw on them as a source of power. So, that's obviously what happened to Shara. The power that is in I keep wanting to say knife. Like, it is a knife. It just feels like it's described in more varied terms, and I can't remember the word used for it. But we see like it being forged when Lucan is reading it and somebody adding a certain like alchemical something to the metal itself. Don't know what was in that, but the fact that she stabbed a Nakothi's heart with it, stabbed the Emperor who had been kept alive with the Nakothi's heart, I'm assuming. And then, the fact that the whole point of these knives, because they are given to gardeners, is to take life. It all does sort of point in the same direction, and it makes sense why the power works the way it does and how it's linked. And I have my suspicions about Shara's bloodline now also. So, then we go to 12 years ago. Calder's been with his mom a year, and his mother has been working on something that she won't talk to him about. And he keeps pressing her, to which she's like, dude, why would I do that? Why would I tell you anything? 1, you're a kid. 2, it's secret. And the whole like attitude that he has here, I really enjoy this so much because again, so much like YA is about young people who just decide to like put themselves into wild situations, and it winds up sort of working out, and they have a few moments of feeling like they're in over their head, but they end up coming out on top in a way that never really feels like they were in that much danger. And I really enjoy how Will White is going to pains to make sure that we realize that Calder, if he were left to his own devices, would probably be dead. He has so many people on his side that, and his mother being as powerful as she is, that he sort of gets rescued from himself. But he really enters into things with a cockiness that, on the one hand, you need to be the kind of person that does what he does. But on the other hand, he truly has no idea what he's about to stick his nose in. And it's really something to like sit back and watch him get slapped down. It doesn't feel like it really encompasses what happens here. It's like, so I had a moment when I was a kid, and I was probably around 9 years old. And I don't know if you guys had this moment yourselves ever in your lives. I think it kind of depends on what kind of person you were or are, how much anxiety you tend to have anyway, and how much self-awareness you had as a kid, or, all kinds of factors. But Calder's sudden realization of how little he understands about the world being made very clear in a fell swoop that leaves him almost shaking. The only thing that I can think to compare it to for myself was there was a day when I overheard my parents talking about bills. And I hadn't ever thought about, like, having to pay a bill for garbage pickup, which, depending on where you live, you don't have to pay that, but where we did, we had to. And then somebody brought up a bill for the phone, and all of a sudden, I thought about how I had also heard them talk about a bill for the gas, and a bill for the television, and car payments, and I suddenly saw, as a kid, with clarity that I would never ever revisit again until I absolutely had to, how many things they were responsible for paying for, and how much of their lives were devoted to just keeping track of stuff that I completely took for granted as simply being there and working as they were supposed to work. You know, I turn the water on and the water turns on, and I don't have to worry about it. But they have to know if they've paid the water bill, and they have to know how much that is. And all of a sudden, I felt this crushing weight of anxiety and fear over, like, how monstrously overwhelming keeping track of all that stuff seemed to me at the time. And I will tell you what, guys, as an adult now, it's not that much better. But as a kid who had never stopped to think about that stuff for any reason, all of a sudden I stopped and thought about all of it at once. And it was just terrifying. Like, I remember that feeling of, like, clutching anxiety and just, like, that is so much. And I consciously was like, I don't need to think about that right now, so I am putting that away. And very purposefully and deliberately shut it out of my mind because it was too much. And that is kind of how it feels with Calder, where he knows that he has stepped in it a little bit, and it's not even like he's so keen to be in on it. It's just that he doesn't want to back down in the face of Bliss. So he decides that he's going to sort of play along, but it doesn't, like, I think that he would have, if he were able to do it without losing face at all, I think that he would have just backed off if he had had the option to do so. But we'll get to that. So anyway, Calder had gotten most of his information from the odd comment his mother left lying behind her as she went to work. "Bring me my jacket, would you? The breeze off the bay is biting. Don't head down to the harbor today, Calder. It's supposed to be dangerous. Whichever guild you choose, make sure it's not the Navigators. They're con men at best, pirates at worst." And so he and Jyrene have decided that they are going to do some investigation. And they dress in all black so that they can look like the Black Watch and sort of, like, you know, go unnoticed. Where he wears a sword so that it makes him look older in its way. Because I think he has some height to him, but he still looks like a kid when you actually see him. So they are looking at this wooden scaffold. All the other ships were shoved off to one side, hull to hull with one another. The scaffolding was so thick, it might as well have been a wooden wall between them and the water. Here and there he caught glimpses of rope lines, a stretch of mast, a few yards of sail. And Calder is, like, I don't understand what this could be for, other than to camouflage everything. Like, are they building an actual ship here? He had, he had traveled to the Imperial prison several times, but that building was all the way across Candle Bay. This side of the bay was a total mystery to him. Workers crawled all over the wooden frame. And she asks him, "Are you willing to get in trouble?" And he just says, "You go left, I'll go right." And they immediately split up. I can't tell you how enjoyable it is for Jyrene to not be the voice of reason. Because I feel like writers often think First of all, I've already mentioned how women characters are often made to be the voice of reason. Men are the ones that are like reckless and wild and do silly things, and the women are the ones that are supposed to ground them. But also, writers often seem to think that if there are two characters, at least one of them needs to be a little bit more level-headed than the other and be a calming influence. And no, Will White has not opted for that. That both of them are a bit too wild for their own good and for each other's good, which is clearly what they like about one another. So, he is able to like walk past a knot of people that are arguing over a map. We need more iron. More iron for what? Ballast? Why should we keep building a trap if we can't catch anything? We never will if we don't get another reader. Are the bindings in place? That's Greyweather's area, but good luck finding her. So that's his mother's name. And he's just sort of, he nods to them and they sort of give him a, offhand nod. He is able to pass without notice, so it seems. Once he was past the scaffolding, he saw what his mother had been working on for the better part of the past year. The ship had a hull built of smooth wood, of a green so dark it was almost black. There were no sails, leaving the mast sticking up like a tree with no leaves. Workmen bustled around the ship's deck, nailing planks down or moving brushes over the railing. Shimmering gold leaf on the side of the hull proudly announced the vessel's name, the Testament. But the most unusual aspect of the ship's construction lay on the docks. A pair of shackles, big enough to wrap around a whole house, sat unlatched on the docks. Each shackle was bolted to an enormous chain, which slithered down the dock and vanished under the water, terminating at some point under the ship. And as we know, this is going to be for an elder that they are going to strap to the hull, which is pretty dope. At the moment, he has no idea that's even a thing. I didn't realize that this was not well known, but he doesn't even know that any elders remain alive. Which I thought that people knew that, and it was simply that the elders were like, they were smaller, weaker, less powerful than they had been, mostly asleep. But he doesn't think that any exist at all. So when he's talked about this later, he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh shit, there's so much that I took for granted he knew in this story, and reading like about Jyrene also, and then seeing it from his perspective and the fact that he had no idea. I'm just like, oh, sweetie. Oh God, I didn't know that you didn't even have a grasp on that, And yeah, as we know, the Testament winds up being the ship that he is soulbound to. So I'm very interested to see how that winds up happening. So he feels a prick against his neck, and there is a woman behind him. And I love this so much. Her name is Cheska. She's the one who, in the present day, left that note for him in the, engraved on the wall of the inside of his ship. And I really enjoy this. She says, you're carrying steel, you know how to use it? And he says, let me draw it and I'll show you, which for some reason sounded so, sexual to me. And she's like, all right, let's do this. But then when he turns around, she's like, oh my God, you're a child. I'm not fighting you. Calder pushed back his hood, then raised the point of his own saber. You have beautiful hair. Then he lunged. I love this so much. He says that because it's the same shade as his, so she's like, I could say the same to you. And he keeps thinking that he's going to show her. This is just a theme with him. Calder keeps thinking, I'm going to bring this person low for underestimating me. And then he keeps proving that they estimated him quite correctly. There was no under about it. And she is way faster than him and is just completely smoking him. And at this point, she says, who taught you to fence, your blind sister? His mother actually, also Greyweather said, peeling off her gloves as she hopped down from the ship. Oh my God. Dude, you just don't like Calder. Babe, what are you doing? I'm trying to teach him to act like an adult by, for instance, not dueling strangers in public for no reason. And Cheska is just like, oh, come on. I'm just, dicking around with him a little bit. And she says something like, might say I'm checking up on your fencing lessons, and also replies with, how would you like one of your own? She doesn't like this jocular tone that Cheska is taking with her. So she backs off, and Elsa, as she leaves, just says navigators, because that is apparently the one that she doesn't have any time for. That's the group, and that is what Calder winds up going for, which is so typical, honestly. I'll have you know that I caught Jyrene myself and sent her straight back home. What do you suggest I do with you? So he asks for a job. And this is an interesting moment here. She sort of drops her guard for a second, and it comes back quickly. But for a moment, she lets him see how sort of tired and frustrated she is. This is guild business. We can always use more readers, but we haven't fallen so low to recruit men as young as yourself. She sounded certain, but Calder had seen the way her eyes drooped and shoulders fell when she came home, sometimes late at night. It looked to me like you can use every hand you can get. How many other readers do they have working here? The guild has spread very thin lately. We were expected to have 3 more, but they were delayed on urgent business. Are you the only reader on this project? Loose strands of Elsa's hair fell over her eyes as she slumped over the table. 2 others started with me. First one was called off, and then the other, they kept promising. Suddenly the fatigue blew away and from Elsa like a hat in the wind, and she shot up from her seat. And I thought for a second that she had recovered herself, like that she was about to share with him her frustration here, and then realized it wasn't really appropriate, or that he was going to be able to exploit that because he's so persuasive, or at least tries to be. But no, it is because the guild head has walked in. And this woman walks in, Bliss. Have we seen Bliss in the other book? Must have heard talk, right? Because the name rang a bell for me. Unless it's just earlier this book that we've heard the name, and it just feels like it was ages ago. Jan says no. Okay. Did we hear the name at all? It doesn't matter. I'm just wondering why this rang a bell for me. A young woman stood on the inside of the shop door as it closed behind her. Her long hair, which almost brushed the floor, was so white as to be almost silver. The color probably came straight from an alchemist's bottle. She wore only a long black coat that covered her entirely from neck to ankles, with a line of silver button fastening down the front. At first glance, Calder thought she was his own age. Then he wondered if perhaps she might be younger. But as she walked closer to their table, she carried herself with the businesslike bearing of a much older woman. So, when she speaks, she has a voice that does sound like a child. And Calder is just like, how old is she? I cannot get a handle on this bitch. So she introduces herself to Calder, and he says, I'm Calder Martin, Madam Bliss. I do apologize. Just Bliss. If you like, you can call me Guildhead. I love what she does here. So, what has your mother told you of our project? Nothing, Bliss, but Guildhead, she corrected. I'm sorry, Guildhead, Bliss. Bliss? He repeated, confused. Guildhead. What would you like me to call you, ma'am? I don't care. I wanted to know how long you'd put up with it. She poured herself a cup of tea, and Calder realized that not only had his tea arrived, but she had stolen his cup. I enjoy this woman's energy a lot. Like, I don't, but I do. You know what I mean? She's one of those people that, like, I don't want to be on the receiving end of this, but I'm certain that watching her, especially watching her put somebody like Calder in his place, who is a cocky teenager who really thinks that he fucking knows something, and she levels him. I'm sure that must be really fun to watch in its way. Not for Elsa, because she's very worried about him. But, you know, so he says, I snuck down here against her will because I wanted to see what she was working so hard on. And he says that he's a skilled reader. And I could work for you on this project. I can work hard and keep it a secret. It pains me to see my mother working so hard. While I can do nothing to help, I'm sure you can understand. Bliss tilted her head quizzically. No, not really. She turned to Elsa. Will he be a security risk? No, Elsa said hoarsely. Excellent. His mother was vouching for him. If the guild had said he could work there, surely no one else would have any problems. And I was like, dude, she's not vouching for you. Look how scared she is. She's asking, should I kill him, basically? And what she says right after is, I'm glad. I wanted to leave his mind intact. So for me, that's almost worse. It's not even just like, oh, do I need to kill him? She's like, do I need to rip his brain apart? Do I need to make it so that he goes mad and doesn't remember anything? Like, Calder. And Elsa says, you brought it here? Of course I did. Don't be silly. It's in my coat. Slowly, it dawned on Calder he might have jumped into a cauldron that was deeper and hotter than he'd expected. What's in her coat? Not a heart, surely. Is it? They wouldn't have one, would they? I mean, I know there's 12. But maybe there's some other kind of artifact that's, like, similar? Because Nakothi wasn't the only elder. So, I don't know. And she asks Calder, do you know what we do here? He says, I imagine you study ancient texts of the elder days, search through ruins, old journals, that kind of thing. I've heard that you look for elder cults and bring them to justice. Bliss set her saucer to spin on its edge. Why would we need to search through ancient journals, Calder Martin? We can study the elders now. Here, under scalpel and scope. He couldn't tell if she was joking or not, but he smiled to show her he wouldn't be easily fooled. I'm sure their remains still exist, but it can't be the same as when they were actually roaming the... Calder trailed off. The saucer, instead of slowing down, had begun to spin faster and faster. Bliss wasn't touching it. Indeed, she seemed not to notice. With an audible whoosh, one of the other diners burst into flames. He jerked his head over to get a closer look, but the woman seemed fine, flipping her news sheet over to read the back. Something slithered behind the counter, dragging wet tentacles across the tiled floor. When he looked closer, he saw no tentacles, no trail of slime. Had he imagined it, or was it lurking out of sight? The windows in the front of the shop shattered, spraying shards all over the room. His eyes snapped to them, but the glass was smooth and whole. All the while, the saucer spun faster and faster. A wisp of smoke rose from the tabletop. Bliss took a sip of her tea, then turned the cup upside down. Nothing spilled. If you want to play on our side, you should at least know the game. The elders are not gone, Calder Martin. They're not dead. Most of them are not even sleeping. They are here, all around us, and the only ones standing between you and their endless hunger are a handful of soldiers in black. A dark fog rolled in through the walls, billowing closer and closer. He jerked back, almost knocking his chair over, and spun around to run, but the fog closed in from all directions. Something moved in the darkness, a misshapen shadow. A wet piece of meat, warm and sticky, slid down his back, and he fumbled with the coat. But then a hand reached out of the fog for his face. He jerked back, raising his arm to shield his eyes. The saucer fell to a stop, clattering on the tabletop. Everything was normal. Fog was gone, the tea shop spotless, the air clean and light sunny. Except the other diners had vanished. Only 3 people were now within the shop. 2 seated women and 1 young man standing alone and shivering, all 3 wearing black. So I guess even the person who, owns the place fucking bailed? I have to assume that it's just that she doesn't care if people know, or maybe folks just didn't that there are so many illusions happening here. I guess they don't necessarily know where those illusions are originating from. So it's not necessarily even blowing her cover. But she says, we can't afford to hire people part-time, Calder Martin. There are things waiting for us in the dark places of the earth, and you will either stand with us against them, or you will stand aside. And he says that sounds like a challenge. I still want to help. What he wanted was to run home and curl up under his bed until he stopped shaking, but he couldn't back down now. Welcome to the Black Watch. And she gives him the little metal badge. I'm glad I didn't have to tinker with your mind. I like Elsa, and I don't think she would have been happy if I'd accidentally killed her son. I don't see the shopkeeper. Should I leave payment on the table or wait till she returns? I'll take care of it, Guildhead. I see. Then I will pay for the tea next time because that is fair. Now I will leave so that your son can express his fear to you in private. Classic. I love that so much. I really do enjoy a character that just says what's happening without it's not even like they're trying to be aggressive. It's like they have no real understanding of why it shouldn't be said at all. Or if they have that understanding, that isn't important to them. The understanding is you shouldn't say it because it's impolite. And they simply don't really understand politeness because why? It's not practical. We all know. And I have that vibe sometimes myself, so I really enjoy when there's a character that's even more intense with it. And he's still shaking. Bliss leaves, and he apologizes to his mother after a few minutes. He has to get himself under control. His mother looked almost as shaken up as he felt. I had no idea she was in the city. She was supposed to be gone for months capturing a nest of crawlers down in Erin. And that's why I tried to keep you away from my work. I should have listened. At last, Elsa cracked a smile. I knew you'd end up in a guild. So, he gets home, and Jyrene is so excited to see him, and is like, what happened? Tell me everything. He just hands over the badge, doesn't tell her any details or reply to any of her questions, and climbs into bed. And, yeah, basically he's traumatized and needs a minute. So then we go to present day, chapter 9. And Nibirius is like, why isn't there anything here? They've landed on the island, and he was expecting it to be crawling with Nikothi's children. And he can't see any, and he doesn't understand it. I have to assume that it's due to the heart and getting close to a heart, and that is what causes them to be activated or wake up, or I don't know, not to suggest that they're just inert until somebody goes for a heart, but that it sort of doesn't affect them until somebody starts to access the power that made them. And that sort of gets them a little bit more energized, so to speak. Also, the fact that Nibirius has been here before, I'm very curious what that's about, because when Bliss says, "Of course I brought it with me, it's in my coat pocket," I didn't want to think that that was a heart, but why else would somebody come here? And was Nibirius here for this previously? Like, they had to have gotten... If that's what she was talking about. I just don't know why else Nibirius would have been here, if not to try and get a heart. Was he here when the whole thing went down with the Emperor? Like, that doesn't seem likely. I don't know, maybe? Anyway, so, Calder. He's just, like, why are you worried that there's no, like, undead children, man? Because it seems to me this place is disgusting anyway. You don't need to add another freaky fucking layer to all of this. Be satisfied with this level of unsettling, because we're all perfectly fine with that. As far as Calder knew, it could have been exactly the ribcage of a giant. He wasn't about to make assumptions when it came to an island haunted by a great elder. "It is all right," Urziah called. "Everyone exaggerates. That is what makes a good story." Nibirius tossed his black curls behind his shoulder. "I tell you, this island and the sea around it were both crawling with abominations. I was not exaggerating, was I, Tristania?" So, he's like, well, all right, you know what? This'll make it safer to go ashore. Calder focused on his vessel, extending a ramp down. It hit the island shore with the smack of wood against flesh instead of crunching against sand. The island continued to disturb him for reasons beyond the obvious. Not only was it frightening to behold, there was no gradual transition between sea and land as he had expected. The ship could get within 5 yards of the shore without problem. Based on what he read from the Leviathan, Calder discovered that the bottom of the island actually curved upward as though it were floating on the surface instead of resting on the ocean floor, like a giant corpse bobbing on the ocean. And I'm like, yeah, I guess as somebody who's a navigator, who's dealt with this sort of thing, coming across something that just doesn't obey the laws of physics like that. And it doesn't move around, you know, even though it is floating, people are able to come back and return to this island. It's not like its location changes. So it's still managing to stay in one spot on the map somehow. So let's see. For the moment, the eerie island served their purpose admirably. He could get closer than he had ever dared to hope, and he wouldn't need to send the witnesses ashore in a rowboat. It meant that if he had to abandon them, at least he wouldn't lose a boat. And I was like, what? So, this is where Nibirius is like, so are we going? And nobody moves. And finally, Calder's like, good hunting. We brought you here as agreed. We'll secure the shore while you search. Feel free to take as long as you need. The chronicler's expression darkened, and Tristania patted him on the shoulder. For some reason, her patting him on the shoulder cracked me up. I don't know exactly what we're meant to interpret from that, but what I got from it was that she saw this coming, that she was aware of the deal not being, like, specific enough, and even maybe that she had tried to warn him, or had warned him, and he just, like, thought that he had a better idea of what was meant than she did. And now she's not even trying to be smug about it. She's just like, tough luck, buddy. I love this. He's like, well, what if Shara decides to attack us while we're running around? You should run back to us, Urziah suggested, as fast as you can. You get back here, and we will protect you. This was not why I hired you, Captain Martin. Isn't it? I was under the impression that we were supposed to deliver you, at which time you would find the artifact on your own. I was under the impression that your crew would provide me with assistance and security. It will be difficult to assist you if we don't know what we're looking for. And Nibirius is like, okay, you know what? Fair. And I appreciated this. He backs off a little bit and is like, yeah, I haven't told you shit, have I? Well, this place is creepy as fuck. And I can kind of understand now that I step back and look at it why this would feel like an unfair deal to you. So at this point, Andal says, explain yourself, but Calder pulls out a spyglass and he looks out onto the island and he sees a bunch of Blackwatch. And it's interesting here. He says, change of plans, now we're definitely staying on the ship. I was open to being persuaded, but now I'm definitely not going out there. And I'm very interested in what the deal is, because he was Blackwatch. Last time we checked, that he had just been inducted. And now he sees them, and as far as he's concerned, they're enemies. But then when he goes on land, one of the Blackwatch approaches him and is like pleased to meet him. He says, I've heard a lot about you. Calder winced. I was afraid of that. I don't hold a young man's foolishness against him. Who hasn't broken out of a prison or two? So, what have you heard, then? That you're on the right side. Everything else is secondary. Calder looked around the group and saw the same respect on 9 other watchmen. He wasn't prepared for the emotion that welled up inside of him at that moment. For a moment he thought he might tear up. So, on the right side, some schism happened in the Blackwatch. What's going on? What happened? Somebody, I have to assume, wanted to just like... I'm sort of picturing a similar situation as with Yala, where it's like, we are going to be for ourselves, and, you know, it's basically us versus other groups, and just trying to get the most sort of payoff that we can. And maybe he was feeling a little like, I don't know. So Calder finds out belatedly that his mother is in charge of this operation at this outpost. And he hasn't seen her in a year. And she doesn't look that much different, which sort of weirds him out. She asks where Shuffles is and where Jerry is. And when he tells her, he is just like, she is really disgusted. And she's like, I didn't even see it years ago. There were suspicions about her father's disappearance, but I'm sorry, I can't imagine how you must feel. And he's just like, I don't even want to talk about it. And he says that he was afraid that Bliss was going to be on this island. Oh, she's coming, Alsa said in a dry tone. What makes you think this is a coincidence? I'm the one who told Nibirius to hire you in the first place. I assumed it was Cheska. Once again, Cheska and I have found ourselves working together. You can imagine my delight. So, what is Nibirius looking for? And I love this. She says eternal life, and he's like, yes, that's very dramatic. I was hoping for an actual answer. Love it. So she explains the thing with the heart of Nkothi and how that is what kept the Emperor alive. And Calder loses it. He loves it, and it's like such a great explanation for him. Apparently, the like wisdom of this age set has been saying that the Emperor is just so good and so full of like willpower and virtue that is what kept him alive for all of these millennia. Everybody actually thought that's what happened. And Calder had been able to see into the Emperor's mind via reading all of these objects of his. and knew that the emperor was not somebody who was a perfect human being. But there was no other explanation for how he could live this long. So that is, for him, just the perfect explanation. Loves it. And this is when she tells him we need a new emperor. Calder caught the scent of opportunity. If they were seeking to raise a second emperor, then this could be the chance he'd waited to seize. But he had to play the safe hand, slowly gathering as much information as he could. Why so? And she is just like, we can't be split up. We're going to have 4 separate kingdoms. We need one empire. He doesn't really feel like it's super necessary that they be united, but he's willing to bypass that for now. And when he asks, so what are we looking for? And she tells him, dude, we're here for another heart. Duh. He can't believe that they would try and bind somebody else to it. And she says this is exactly what the Black Watch was founded to do. Turn the powers of the elders to the good of humanity. Which I thought was interesting because that sounds like what the elder worshippers also say. And yet apparently the Black Watch go after elder worshippers. So what's the deal there? It seems like Jyrene and Alsa's ideals are fairly aligned to me, actually. And I find it strange, the reaction that they're having to one another when they seem to want the same thing. So, finally, Nibirius, asks for Alsa to come and inspect the area. And then we go to Jyrene. And we have already seen from Lucan's perspective how this went. But Jyrene is just, first of all, a little taken aback at how well she's been treated. She full on expected to be killed. And not only is she being kept alive, but she's being kept alive in fairly comfortable surroundings. She's being given the supplies that she asks for, books, combs, medicine. It's not like they are speaking with her. Eventually she can speak to Lucan. But initially she had expected them to torture her, and they're not even doing that. And she's genuinely like, I don't really know what to do here. So this is when she sort of tries to mentally reach out for her vessel. And Lucan, who is a reader, obviously, feels her doing that. And is like, they have that sealed. You're not going to be able to get at it. And she tries to engage him on this topic. It's clear she's lonely. She also does want some information. And he says, I hear you tried to betray us to the elders. And she kind of wants to rebut that, but it is sort of what happened. So she does a sort of straddling the line. Not a betrayal, no, she said. The elders aren't our enemies. They are strange and eternal. Some say they have knowledge from beyond the stars, and they certainly have powers greater than anything we humans can control. Shouldn't we learn to live alongside them instead of fearing them as we do? And Lucan brings up what I keep wanting somebody to say, which is, they enslaved you. The Emperor has very vivid memories of what it was like to live under the rule of Nkothi specifically. Which is part of what makes this interesting, because she says that when the elders kept us as slaves, we were primitives. We fought them with tools of bones and rock. How could they work with a race like that? They had no choice but to keep us as slaves, the way we use animals for their strength. Which, for me, no, that is not a good enough explanation. But then, when he brings up, so you think we're advanced enough to strike a bargain now, she's seizes on that, thinks that she's sort of convincing him. And she says they built civilizations. They didn't eliminate humanity, although they must have been tempted. And she says, it's good to question the accounts of elders. Practically the only details we have come from their greatest opponent. You're not a reader, are you, Gyrene? How had he known that? I don't see how that's relevant to the subject at hand. I'm sure you don't. Then he was quiet, and none of her questions could coax him back into a discussion. So what I'm thinking he means by this is simply, as a reader, he has seen the way that elders have, like, the impression that they've made on objects and has been able to see their history, has felt the energy coming off of them, and so has a better understanding than she could about what elders actually are and what they're capable of and how they have behaved. So her assessment that, like, well, you know, history was written by the victor, which, you know, tends to be true, obviously. But in this instance, there is a way to verify. It's not like things just happened in a vacuum in the past with no way of calling forth history at all. And it's odd to me that this doesn't occur to her. And when he says that it's obvious, it doesn't seem relevant to her, that she doesn't really understand what he means by that, you know? So finally, this is when she gets this message, which I don't understand how this is possible or how it's allowed. But she begins to sense this darkness in her cell, and she tells Lucan not to make a sound for his own safety. A voice slithered out of the dark, whispering directly into her ear. Gyrene, the heart has been found. We have gathered our forces. We must secure the heart before the Black Watch can bind it to one of their choosing. And she thinks, oh, we've got time. They don't have a candidate. And this voice is like, oh, they do. And it's the candidate is on their way. And she's like, okay, I want to help, but when can I get out of here? Continue to wait. We will soon have a powerful piece on the island, which I am assuming is the handmaiden that shows up. I think that has to be... This is a message from the actual elders or from one of her cult that's in contact with the elders. I'm not sure. And she is sort of like conflicted about what she wants to happen here. Part of her would rather die than have to face Calder and explain what she's been up to. Another part of him, or another part of her, really doesn't want to die before she can explain, so that he just thinks that she has betrayed him and never cared about him. From the next cell, Lucan cleared his throat. Can I speak now? You're safe, she called back. If the Sleepless had known that someone was close enough to overhear their message, they would have undoubtedly sent an Elder Spawn killer to eliminate the witness. It was fortunate for Lucan that he'd listened to her advice. What was that? He asked, sounding fascinated rather than repelled. She was only too happy to explain. How does she work with people that are like, yeah, if they overhear, they'll send a killer? And she's just like, I don't see what everybody is so caught up about. Yeah. Gyrene, what are you doing? Honestly, I'm kind of like Team Shara on her assessment of their beliefs. So then we go into chapter 10. I'm like practically out of time, but I've talked about a lot of this, like in general already. And I'll talk about the main thing here, which is Calder being gradually inducted into the Watchmen. There's a sort of ritual where he gets like these iron spikes, one a day for 7 days as he's being trained, essentially. And once he gets the 7th one from his mother, everybody like stops and applauds. And that is about as much of a fuss as they make about it. And he has tried to visit his father in prison a number of times, and he keeps being turned away. And then one day he sees somebody climbing out a window of the prison fairly high up. And he's watching, like, is she trying to escape? What exactly is she doing? And then she just jumps. And Calder freaks out and then sees another person. And about 5 by the end of this section jump to their deaths. But I am guessing there may be more of them. And Calder is like, what the fuck? What could be happening in there that people are choosing to do this to themselves? And he is talking to Jyrene about it and realizing that he has been telling himself that he could break his father out of prison, but it was always just such a hypothetical thing. Both because things had been happening to him that were so intense and life-changing that he was barely getting his feet under him again, and also because it's fucking difficult and he has no real idea of how to do it. And now, seeing that there are people willing to just throw themselves off a fucking cliff, essentially, rather than be in the prison, this makes it feel a lot more like, I gotta get him out of there. What could possibly be going on in there? And Jyrene is like 100% into the idea of him breaking his dad out. She is like, oh, yes, not only are we going to do this, I am going to help you, and we are going to get this motherfucker safe, and it's going to be no problem. I love her energy and how excited she is. And he tries to tell her he doesn't need her help. And she says, let's see, the night before my father left, he came to me and said he'd be going away. He told me that no matter what I was told, he absolutely wasn't dead. 3 days later, the Black Watch came and told me he had been killed in the line of duty, that the means of his death was confidential. I don't know what happened, or if he's alive, or if he knew he was about to die and told me so I wouldn't worry. But at this point, if I had any idea where he was, I'd go find him. Don't give me that a man has to do things for himself. We saw that show together. I really like that. He tried to use a line from a play, and she's just like, bitch, don't even try. So, yeah, this whole thing is just, we're amping up to a heist. I don't think that he's going to be successful because we haven't really heard anything about his dad in modern day, but you know, maybe he is successful and his dad just doesn't survive very long. Maybe his dad's already dead for all we know, you know, I don't know. But maybe his dad isn't even in that prison. Maybe he was lied to about what his dad is even up to, but I'm interested in finding out. I do really want to know. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again very much to George for commissioning this episode. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. And I appreciate all of you for hanging out in the chat with me and keeping me company. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.